Councilman Felipe Fuentes. All right, today is Energy Environment. Today's January 20th. Colleagues, I wanted to take items 4 through 9 on consent, but we have cards on those, so we will dispense with those after we go. So my apologies to those folks who are here on 4 through 9. Let us go ahead and take item 1, Mr. Prieto.
Certainly. Item number 1, Mr. Chair, members. Item number 1 relates to a report from the City Controller, Mayor, and the Council relative to the Industrial, Economic, and Administrative Survey of the Department of Water and Power. We have representatives from the Controller's Office, the Controller, as well as Navigate Consulting.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Prieto. I see that the Controller is here. Let's go ahead and hear his presentation, and then we'll take the staff from Navigate. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Council members. Thank you so much for having us here today and for providing us the opportunity to present the findings of the 2015 DWP Industrial, Economic, and Administrative Survey. I'm going to just
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt
Sure.
you. Let's go ahead and let the staff on items 4 through 9 go. We'll take public comment. I think if we need you, we'll call you, but we'll go ahead and if you're here for items 4 through 9, you can go ahead and leave. It's fine. My apologies. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem at all. I'm just going to do a brief overview and then turn it over to the folks at Navigant. As you know, the IEA is a very special kind of report. It's really distinct from other audits that are performed by my office. And the city charter requires my office to conduct the survey of property and business of each of the city's proprietaries at least once in every 5 years. And these surveys, like the one that we're presenting this afternoon, are conducted jointly with the mayor and with the city council. The 2015 IEA is nearly 600 pages. It's a comprehensive review of the strategic and the operational readiness of DWP to meet the critical challenges that it faces in the future. Now, the IEA process was a lengthy one, beginning with the joint administrators agreeing to what the scope of work is, choosing the consultant, and, of course, the research and preparation of the report, which was done by the outstanding team, and they really were terrific from Navigant Consultant. In preparing the report, Navigant's team conducted independent research, interviewed more than 70 managers, leaders, stakeholders, including labor, the chair of this committee, and the topics have included water and power infrastructure, physical and cybersecurity, emergency preparedness, technology infrastructure, customer service, economic development and community outreach, and rate benchmarking. You can see why it adds up to 600 pages. Remarkably, every one of the stakeholders interviewed said that he or she was dissatisfied in one way or another with the status quo. It's really quite staggering. But it should also be noted that there are some very good findings. First, the department does a very good job of consistently supplying competitively priced water and power to the people of LA, and the products that they deliver are quality ones. The consultants also praised the department's current collection of water resource plans and noted that it is on track to achieve the city's and the department's shared overarching goals of increasing local water supply and expanding conservation efforts. However, here's what the consultants also found, and they can get into more detail on this. The department is contending with an aging infrastructure and a suboptimal contracting process and constant budget pressures. I'm sure these are not unfamiliar to you. DWP does not have the strategic plan to address the myriad of customer service issues that it faces. There is an immediate and urgent need to address critical but outdated IT systems. And last, the department, unlike many other utilities, has yet to transition its customers to smart metering technology in a really meaningful way. The consultants noted in their report that the organizational structure is an inhibitor to achieving optimal performance, and that what is really needed is to look at what that organizational structure is in order to achieve much greater accountability, and also to really make sure that it has the nimbleness to perform in the present as well as in the future. So what's to be done about this? In the near term, we're calling for increased transparency through reporting and also tying future rate increases to financial and performance metrics specified by ordinance, and that's actually what was specifically recommended in the report. In the long term, the consultants recommended that the city reform the department's governance structure. Not that that is the cure to all issues and all problems, but that would go a long way, we believe. and also may require a ballot measure. Some of the examples that they quoted of other governance structures are an elected board of governance, which you see in Sacramento, for example, city council governance, an appointed board of governance. Each of these, by the way, have their pluses and minuses. In reviewing these, there's none that I would necessarily take on exactly as recommended, but there's an opportunity to create a group, and that's what's recommended in the report, that would actually make recommendations for possible ballot measure. I want to stress that this working group should and would be made up of a broad swath of stakeholders, including ratepayers, and including also, of course, labor, which has a very important stake in all this. In closing, I'd like to thank Navigant for their hard work. I want to thank the mayor, the CLA, DWP for their cooperation and leadership, especially General Manager Marcy Edwards and the Board of Commissioners. I'd also like to remind you and everybody else about what we have on our site called the DWP Utility Panel, utilitypanel.la. And it's our open data site which is dedicated to DWP. It includes DWP financials, including payroll, spending, their checkbook, and we've also added an interactive dashboard. We've done that actually along with Navigant and with the department. The dashboard includes water and power usage by zip code, how much water main lines have been replaced, water and power usage over time, power line, pole replacements, pipe replacements, break info, a lot of different both metrics as well as indicators. And you can, of course, see that at our website. Again, thank you for your time. The auditors from Navigant are, of course, here, can answer lots of questions. I'm going to need to go in a few moments with my apologies, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Colleagues, any questions for the controller? Thank you for being here.
Okay, great.
All right, let's go ahead
Thank you
and
so
have
very
the
much.
folks from Navigant come on up and present on what I found to be a very good read over the holidays. Thank you for supplying us with so much information. I'll let you go through your presentation, but at the outset, I wanted to see if you could help us understand. There's a lot of recommendations, and job well done on this analysis. But if you could, at some point, wherever it's appropriate, help us understand the issues about cyber security and infrastructure, the asset security. It is something that, in the executive summary, it's on page 47, but it jumped off the pages for me because it seems to me that it is probably the most emblematic of the need for improved governance at the utility, because it is an area that seems to be very vulnerable and certainly quite necessary for all of us to be able to protect. So I don't know where it is in your presentation, but if you can spend a little extra time helping us understand what it is that the department, specifically the commission, should do immediately.
Okay, we'd be happy to do that. Council members, thanks for the opportunity to present our findings. I'd like to just take a moment to recognize, so in the room today are lots of people who helped work on this. Members of my team from Navigant are here, members from the LADWP, and my team did the last IEA survey, and we've done most of the rate analysis on behalf of the City Council over the last 7 or 8 years. And I would say that the level of cooperation, and not just cooperation, but dialogue and innovative thinking and thinking outside of the box from the department team, the rest of the city team, CLA, CAO, the controller's office, the mayor's office, was unprecedented in my experience. And so I truly do think this is the best work we've done, and I think some of the best work that the city has done. So I just wanted to thank the department. I know we weren't always easy to work with, and the rest of the city as well, particularly CLA and CAO, for all of their support as we went through the process. So just very briefly, a little bit about the scope of the survey. So the controller led the team that retained Navigant to lead the survey, and it's a comprehensive review of the strategic and operational readiness of the organization to meet critical challenge and an evaluation of current operations against best practices. This IEA was different than previous ones in that it had specific focus areas. The last IEAs were general management audits, so they looked at everything but didn't focus on anything. And our direction this time was to do this differently, to focus on some very specific areas. We're going to talk about those as we go through the report today. The primary focus areas were water and power infrastructure. So a great deal of focus on, is the current infrastructure robust enough, and are the plans robust enough to actually meet the needs of the city going forward? And then, is the department adequately ready to do all of the things that are mandated or regulated for it to do over the next 5, 10, 15 years? So a lot of focus on infrastructure. Joint services infrastructure, which includes what you mentioned in terms of physical security, emergency preparedness, cybersecurity, IT and technology, and all of those sort of things were a real focus area. We didn't focus on the CIS system issues because those have been looked at by many others over the past year. And so we looked at that in the context of how the department implements technology generally, but not the specifics of CIS, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then governance became a big issue as we worked through this. We interviewed more than 50 stakeholders, including obviously DWP staff and executive leadership, city management, elected officials, the leadership of IEBW Local 18. We reviewed hundreds, perhaps thousands of documents. And then we did a lot of peer research, benchmarking, and, quite honestly, we applied our prior experience and insight with LADWP. So I'm going to talk briefly about the challenges facing LADWP, and as members of this committee, I'm sure most of these will sound familiar. If we look externally, so increasing regulatory requirements, and the requirements are dramatic. The city's already made significant progress on moving towards the renewable standards and exceeding them. New legislation in the state, the city's own policy objectives create even more of a stretch target, as well as energy efficiency targets and all of those things. So those would be significant in and of themselves, but at the same time, internally, you have aging infrastructure on both the power and the water side. A lot of attention lately on the water side in terms of, the pipe system's ability to last and survive. But you have the same issues on the power side, and they're equally important. They get attention when there's lots of heat spells and systems fail, which hasn't happened so much in the past few years. But they're just as critical. Drought and climate change have a huge impact on how the department operates, how people manage scarce resources, both water and power, and how the city can manage increasingly scarce resources, particularly on the water side. So one of the things we looked at are there different ways to manage the city's total water, so not just potable water, but all water. Large capital programs are a solution to these things, and the department over the years has had a mixed record of implementation. So we're looking at how to, faced with a really big challenge, how do you effectively, efficiently, and productively spend the money to do that? We'll talk a little bit about that today. You're obviously going to hear lots more about that as the rates come before you. Physical and cybersecurity, the councilman teed that up, so we'll talk about that as we move through the report. The department also has urgent IT needs. It has aging computer infrastructure and an accounting system and a finance system that need to be upgraded. Electronic metering needs to move forward more aggressively. So lots of big system needs, and again, a tough track record on implementing it. Focus on the customer experience. We'll talk more about that. You've heard a lot about it because of the CIS issues. And then obviously for the city and the department, maintaining financial health and meeting targets. Governance has become, as we went through, the single biggest issue that people we interviewed, from the mayor's office to the union, inside the department, outside the department, everyone we talked to identified governance as a major issue. And as the controller mentioned, there was, I would say, unprecedented universal dissatisfaction with the status quo, not necessarily any agreement on what the fixes are, right? And so when we talk about what our suggestions on governance are, we'll talk about that. One of the bright spots from previous work we've done, the department's made significant strides in its planning capabilities for both water and power. Its resource plans, we think, are close to best practice in the industry, thoughtful, insightful, and very forward-looking, and lay out clear choices for policymakers such as yourself in terms of different options that you can take either on the power or the water side. So we think that's a huge improvement, very different from what we said 6 years ago or 7 years ago. Just focusing on power briefly, and I'll do this quickly because I think you're familiar with this. Ladwp is entering a major transition period where its system changes from basically the equivalent of an extension cord. You know, got some big fixed assets that are basically just full-time providing power and ramping up minimally, to a system that ramps up and ramps down based on the type of renewables that you're using, based on the transmission assets that are in play. It's a very different type of system, much more complicated to run, requires a lot more resourcing decisions, balancing cost, reliability, efficiency, and moving towards the city's goals of cleaner and cleaner assets, while you're still moving away from a system that is still predominantly powered by coal. Right? So the department is slightly behind the transition away from coal, but it's a very expensive, very complicated transition to make. And we think the department is doing it in a balancing costs and reliability with moving it forward. And you can always push them to do more, but it comes at a cost. So there are choices for the city to make there. The 2014 IRP is a very strong planning document. It addresses state and local mandates for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, repowering the coastal plants, moving away from coal, meeting the 33% renewable portfolio standard by 2020, increasing local solar, and meeting the 15% energy efficient goals by 2020. And it lays out credible plans to do those things. It is not a pipe dream document. So while great progress has been made on the planning side, I think the track record on actually implementing the programs is more spotty. There are certainly successes, but there are also challenges that relate to procurement and contracting. So the department has a very difficult time speedily securing contracts for the people who actually install the energy efficiency equipment, or who are working on the big plant conversions, or even letting, you know, a contract for a renewable plant will move through this process much quicker than a lot of the other things that flow up behind it. So it's a huge impediment. It's resulted in large sums of money not being spent on time or being diverted to other programs. Project management, we think the department needs to bring in more and more outside project management professionals to help them. The department is a very sort of inbred, ingrown institution, and we think project management is a discipline and an art form, and the department would benefit from having more capabilities in that area. The hiring process doesn't meet the needs of the 21st century Ladwp, and we propose some options, including moving outside of the city hiring process in the IEA, and we'll talk more about that. A big issue is moving financial resources between programs on the power side without adequate oversight from the CFO's office, potentially the general manager's office as well, and we think that's just not best practice and creates issues. And then creates disappointment issues with the Energy and Environment Committee and the full City Council when budgets change dramatically, program costs escalate from what you were originally told. All of those issues sort of tie back to that. So we really think the city is posed with an interesting challenge to balance its policy and regulatory objectives against the performance and productivity shortfalls that impact rates and other financial metrics. We've proposed, and the department has adopted, some short-term fixes that you'll see as the rate ordinances come, and we'll talk about that. And I would say that's some of the most creative thinking I've ever seen from the department, and lots of credit to the ratepayer advocate and DWP for aggressively adopting those and moving them forward. They will undeniably help with transparency and reporting and things that are essential to sort of trust and good management. Water, I'm going to go quicker because water is, I think, one of the success stories in the department in terms of how the water system is managed. And the water system has been, I think, much more aggressive about adopting project management philosophy. They run their budget and financing programs in a more tighter way. They obviously, though, have huge challenges. Aging infrastructure, and it seems like every week we hear about a pipe that fails. I understand the media likes to write about the pipes that fail. The department's failure rate is not out of pattern with other cities. And we've looked at their programs. Their programs we think are solid for replacing it. And even if you throw more money at them, they have a limited ability to ramp up much more beyond what they are. So the incremental dollars don't have quite the incremental benefits. So their programs are effective and they're utilizing capital well. Reducing reliance on purchased water, they have a strategy to do that, which should over time reduce purchased water cost. And they have a much better rate mechanism that they've proposed for looking at how the different water portfolio is managed. And then obviously, as part of climate change and the drought, reducing per capita water consumption by 20% by 2017. And I think, people look at California and are amazed with how citizens have really stepped up to the plate on that. And that's true in LA as well. Key findings, the water supply, storage, and demand management strategies are sound. The asset management strategies need to be finalized. They're in the preliminary stages, we would say, documented and then given, and this is important given the extent of the aging infrastructure. Water infrastructure replacement rates are improving, but not quickly enough to ensure system reliability over the long term. But again, throwing money at it is not necessarily the solution. Our recommendations are short on this: ramp up the infrastructure plans and related hiring and outsourcing, implement a broader outsourcing strategy, and redesign the procurement process. Joint services. So joint services is everything but power and water. So it's all the support functions. Starting with customer service. So Navigant's belief is that LADWP does not have a customer service focused culture and needs to strengthen and diversify its mitigation plans for the current CIS issues. It's too reliant on throwing bodies at it, and really a sort of step back we think is called for. We also benchmarked the standard customer touchpoint metrics, what you would expect every utility to do and do well, against peer utilities, and found that LADWP had performed in the third and fourth quartiles for most metrics in 2014 and had trouble reporting some metrics. We really think that's an indication that real focus, bringing in, again, outside people with a customer service background into the department, we think are steps in the right direction. Technology infrastructure, large-scale new system project implementation issues are well known. Obviously, the CIS falls into that. There are other systems that the department is going to have to implement in the next few years, including a new financial system. The department lacks an IT strategic plan/roadmap, and we think without that, things may not go well, and you can throw an awful lot of money down the drain in those areas as well. Existing systems that have been in place, legacy systems, the IT programs perform well in most areas, and the department is good at dealing with those issues. So it's really new system implementation, different level of performance. Security and emergency preparedness. So security is progressing towards compliance with regulatory standards, but it's highly decentralized, where individual facilities are responsible for their own. It's not coordinated in a central way. And in our view, this is our opinion, it's not appropriately prioritized within the department. We believe upper management needs to increase its focus in this area, create a centralized department, bring in the right professionals, create a different mindset around security and emergency preparedness than we see today. The power system operates under NERC rules. They pass their NERC audits. They're in compliance with those particular standards, which is good and essential. So most of the issues we're talking about are not NERC-related issues. And we can go into that in more detail if you want. The Emergency Preparedness Program has defined policies, but routine training and consistent exercises don't occur on a regular basis. There isn't a champion. There isn't an appropriate sort of centralized control. And again, we think this is a program that needs to be championed by senior management. Economic development and community outreach, the program strategy, design, implementation, and monitoring should be strengthened. The department can do more with economic development that it's doing. One of the board members expressed his frustration with we go this direction, we go this direction. You know, they respond to political influence, public influence, customer influence, but they don't have a really cohesive, focused, and strategic direction in that area. Governance. So governance was not originally part of the scope, but was added after numerous conversations with stakeholders made it clear that it should be included. Governance challenges relate to decentralized city authority, so multiple layers of governance, but a lack of insight and authority into LADWP, and in the past, and this is changing, difficulty in getting timely information, difficulty in getting critical information, constantly changing sort of financial information. And at the end of the day, City Council could say yes or no. You could vote yes for a rate increase, vote no. You couldn't actually change it without sending it back to the drawing board. That whole process is not efficient and not really effective. And at the end of the day, it's sort of, well, who is in charge? Is it the mayor's office? Mayor can hire and fire, he can appoint the board, and he can help set policy. But again, he's also one step removed. The general manager, I think it's well known, the general manager has been probably one of the toughest jobs in the city, and there have been many, many, many general managers, and that's created its own instability issues as well. So the ratepayer advocate, the office of the ratepayer advocate was, I think, a good attempt to start to fill that, but with no bite, no authority to actually compel information, no authority until some now in the new ordinances that you're going to see. So didn't really wasn't completely outside the process and independent, and didn't have the regulatory authority, sort of not quite fish, not quite fowl. And we think they've done, a good job in that structure, but the structure itself limits their ability to be effective. We talked in the beginning about the city's hiring process, and we believe that city personnel processes prevent LADWP from being sufficiently responsive and nimble. And when you couple that with a procurement process that makes it very difficult for them to contract, it becomes very clear why they don't staff their programs quickly enough and don't bring contractors in enough. And then it's not a mystery to say why weren't the programs implemented on time and on budget. It's very difficult to implement things on time without people and contracting resources. And they've had, in some cases, up to a 2-year delay getting contracts put forward. That shouldn't be an excuse, but it is a reality. Lack of external reporting, transparency, and trust. I think in the past, the department has been plagued by, quite frankly, a lack of trust in their communications, a lack of trust in their financial information and their program information. We've seen a lot of really positive signs, but, I think failure to regularly and openly communicate with all the stakeholders was one failing. I think the DWP team has done a great job of turning that around, and I credit the general manager with setting that environment. Decentralized internal authority. So lack of controls related to finance, security, and emergency preparedness are the most notable. One of our recommendations is to make the CFO's office a true CFO with financial accountability and accountable to you and the City Council for the finances of the department. That's not the way it is right now. The power system and the water system are responsible for their own finances, and the current financial office is more of a clearinghouse. Not appropriately vetting. They don't have the right to challenge and send back. And most CFOs, almost all CFOs in well-governed organizations have that ability. I talked about the role of the OPA, so we've got that done. So some good news. This is not just the issues report. Many of the short-term reporting and transparency issues are being addressed by LADWP and will be before you in both the water and the power rate ordinances that will come before you sometime in the next few months. And again, I think it's innovative. It matches what investor-owned utilities do as well as other municipally-owned utilities. It's closer to what SMUD reports to their governance structure. Huge step in the right direction. Doesn't fix everything, and there's still issues with your lag time in being able to, when they're not meeting their targets, how quickly you can adjust things. It's better. It's a step in the right direction. It won't be a panacea, but really, really good short-term progress. In the IEA survey, we noted that there's no defined process in the department for repurposing funding on a program-by-program basis, and that there appears to be no formal process to report key program financial milestones to leadership, except when contracts go to the board or come here. However, overall, there's just inadequate internal financial controls. This contributes to uncertainty around the ultimate use of potential funds from a rate increase, and it also creates issues around financial controls. We believe those need to be reestablished in the financial services organization under the CFO, and they need to have full accountability to this body and the full council. Obviously, without increased transparency, it's difficult for LADWP to earn back the public trust. We think they've set themselves on the right path. Obviously, they've got to execute on it as well. In the longer term, we've recommended a defined process for governance reform, and we did it with a lot of study. We looked at ballot initiatives that have worked. We looked at governance changes that have worked in the city and those that haven't. We looked at what were some of the most common causes for reforms failing in the city of Los Angeles, and it's usually not having the right people involved, not communicating clear goals from the very start of the process to the end of the process, not having the right amount of public participation, and not driving to a conclusion, letting individual stakeholders' own agendas sort of sidetrack things. So we've given a lot of thought to, well, what's a process that could at least have a chance of helping in that? And so, we believe that the council needs to direct CLA and CAO to form a working committee to examine governance reforms for LADWP. We've laid out a series of models that they can consider. There's obviously additional ones. We believe that needs to include the members of this committee, the mayor's office, CAO, CLA, the controller, city attorney, OPA, a representative from the DWP board, the general manager, and labor. We think not involving labor is an absolute guarantee to having this not work. They have a lot of opinions. They have a lot of ideas. They are part of the solution if there's going to be a solution. And so we think it's really key that they be part of this effort. We think it needs to have a task of reporting on findings to the City Council and recommending measures for the 2017 initiative. If it could be done sooner, that's awesome, but we think 2017 is realistic. There's a lot more in the report about the mechanics of that. We're happy to answer questions about it. We think you also need to have outside help. You need to have a facilitator who's strong enough to stand up to all the parties is sort of the short term. A little bit like what happened when you were under the consent decree with the police department. So you had no choice but to comply, right? And that actually led to amazing changes. You look at the police department now, they're one of the city's shining success stories. So we think a similar process without the federal government's involvement would be useful. What's next? So the review of water and power rates proposal is underway. We've worked on that. The first reports on water and power have been delivered. I expect they will change a bit over time. Obviously, your feedback will influence how the final reports go, and changes that happen between now and the time that you actually vote will also get factored in. We do believe that many of the financial and performance metrics, not the organizational changes, but the metrics have been adopted by DWP. We're really pleased and delighted to see that. And we do believe that will help improve transparency, communication, and accountability. The department also has productivity and efficiency challenges. There's a chapter in the rates report, and I'm sure we're coming back here to talk about that sometime soon. So we think this is part of the balancing act, which is yes, all those programs we talked about are absolutely essential, but the city deserves to know that they will be implemented in a productive and efficient fashion, and that there's no reason why you have to wait 5 years. There's no reason why you have to wait for the next MOU. There are things that can happen now that will help drive productivity. So that's sort of the teaser for what we're going to talk about when we come back. But we think that's an essential part of your balancing act is, yes, we think the programs are important, but we want to make sure they're also implemented in an efficient way. City Council may choose to introduce new motions related to the 2015 IEA survey. We have taken the liberty of drafting a first set of those, which we provided to the Controller's Office and are happy to send to this committee as well. So it's a starting point just for you to think about. And they're all driven by recommendations from the report translated into what are potential council actions. There's obviously more than what we've thought of, but it's a good start, so we'll make sure that we send that to you. A few examples include direct the CLA to retain a consultant, form a governance reform committee per that thing. Consultant facilitator is probably a better word. Direct the CLA to develop a formal procurement study for LADWP for power and water to help address the contracting issues that we've talked about. Direct the CLA to retain a firm to work with LADWP and prepare its corporate security plan, technology, infrastructure, and strategic plan. And there's also one for the CLA and the CAO to study what's an alternative way to manage the city's water supply. Look at wastewater, stormwater capture, potable water, imported water, groundwater cleanup, mitigation, to manage it as one resource. And increasingly, state legislation and federal legislation will begin to push you in that direction. It's already starting. You know, a lot of work is being done, and California is really at the forefront of how do I manage this as one uniformed resource and treat it that way. And so we talk about that quite a bit in the report, but we really think it's something that needs to study. We're not making the recommendation that all go under DWP or all go under sanitation. It's one of those things where you may form a new entity, you may combine entities. Looking at it in a really disciplined way we think is important and could end up saving the city a lot of money in unconnected investments on a going forward basis. So that's what's in the report, and I want to come back to your specific question on cyber and physical security. And I'll talk for a minute, and then this is an area that Chuck delved into. I think the first thing to say is there's no smoking gun. There's no, should you be having trouble sleeping at night because there is a great big hole in either the cyber security or the physical security. I don't believe that's the case. What we do think is that the focus on those issues isn't necessarily at the level that you want. And particularly in the cyber realm, we live in a different world than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We all read about our banks being hacked and Target being hacked and the federal government being hacked. And I think the director of the CIA or the NSA, his own personal email account was hacked, right? So, the nation's top security guy, experienced a hack. Vigilance in that area, the right degree of professionalism, the right staff, and the right focus are all things we think the department can improve on and needs to improve on quickly. And I think the city's chief technology officer is a great resource. The LAPD is a great resource. There are firms that specialize in this that are the right people to bring in. We think it's a big focus area, and we don't think without some motivation from you and from council that it will get the focus it deserves. So we think that's an area for attention. Do you want to talk a little bit about physical security?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Good afternoon. My name is Chuck Tooman. I'm a director in Navigant's Energy Practice and work with Andrew on the survey this year as well as the survey last 2009. Actually, I'll take a step back and talk about each of the three areas that we looked at in security for this IEA survey. It's important to note, and just to reiterate what Andy said early in the presentation, is that the department is meeting its requirements from a regulatory perspective. That is to say that its critical infrastructure protection planning and the execution of those plans and programs is on target and on plan. And that is a NERC requirement. That is a bulk power system requirement. And so the department is actually meeting those regulatory needs. Where we found areas of potential focus going forward was more in the ongoing development and rollout and maturing of both cybersecurity and physical security. Our analysis looked at 10 cybersecurity domains and found, from a capability maturity model perspective, some areas that need some attention in the cyber area. At a higher level, to dovetail with what Andy said, overall governance of cyber, a great deal more urgency could be placed on the program. I would say that resource constraints need to be addressed, getting the right people in the right positions to execute those programs and plans. Commitment to a standard set of policies across the power, water, and joint systems, very important to do. And to increase the communication on cybersecurity and the execution of those plans across those systems is also important. From a physical security perspective, many of the same lessons apply, or teachings apply, I suppose we could say. Significant decentralization of accountability into the systems and then into the divisions for physical security down to the facility level. As an example, we would have expected to see during our interview process a consolidated list of potential physical security gaps that were prioritized with action plans against them, and we did not find that document. These are just a few of the things that we would expect to see in a more mature planning effort. And then similarly, in emergency preparedness, significant, again, decentralization such that the power and water systems could create their own plans, and when we were conducting our research, when we asked for these plans, we did not receive them to review the emergency management plans. Now, a great deal of work is being conducted to build up the strategic planning in these areas. In fact, I think we referenced it in our report that the department is creating an enterprise cybersecurity plan. I would say again that we would place greater urgency on that among many other types of planning efforts.
Was that?
Well, it is. I mean, I was particularly struck about sort of the lack of, or I should say, in the loading order of priorities, the business continuation management plans, for example, in the case of an earthquake. It's just ironic to me that we would pass mandates to have seismic retrofitting to buildings, and that might be very good for buildings, but they're potentially going to be interruptions in service because we don't have the documentation to make sure that we have water and power flowing, or at least it's not readily available, or it's not as prioritized, say, as some of the other things that the department is doing. So to me, I think it's just emblematic of the real need for a governance reform of the utility. And it's not to say that the priorities that the department is working on aren't important, but in the loading order of things, it just seems to me that they're a little askew. And, I see in the report, time and time again, whether you look at water or the power side of things, it just seems that there is these competing interests. And I think it comes back to the real need to have a fortified governance structure that has the ability in a full-time fashion to focus on the day-to-day management of the utility. And as I was reading all of this, a couple of questions were sort of begged in my mind in terms of how it is that we do this. You suggest potentially doing a municipal utility district model, or it's been suggested, I think it was a RAND report or the PA consulting report. There are numerous reports that may have suggested a not-for-profit model. It seems to me that there isn't one sort of way that we can necessarily copy that would actually work for the utility. So what is your best sort of guess as to a route that the city could go or the utility could go? In my mind, the best way for us to go is just to fortify the existing charter. I think it makes it more difficult for us to try to reinvent some wheels here without playing in in the domain of the county or the state asking for permission, and I think that muddies waters a little bit. But what is the most sort of anecdotal example to something that is, I think, one-off, like the Department of Water and Power, that we could look to?
So I think you teed up actually really well sort of what the challenge is. And when we looked at this, we looked at, could we recommend one of these options and say it would work? And then, LA is not Sacramento, and it's not Austin, Texas, and it's not Jacksonville, Florida. It's LA, and it has its own unique blend of the city's utility, which is not only, a utility with an obligation to provide safe, reliable service, but it's also a policy extension of city government, right? Many of the programs the department are doing are because of city policies going beyond state mandates or federal mandates.
The feed-in tariff I think, is a perfect example of how we've gone really just, to the north of a goal and statutory requirement.
Right. So many of the options would remove the city's ability to drive policy because you'd basically be outsourcing governments and control. So we said, so you can't just take the SMUD model, it won't work. And then we looked at other things. We looked at the unique political situation, and we spent time with the general manager of SMUD and other general managers involved in the process and talked about how do you deal with the politics, right? How do you run a utility and deal with the politics? And so this is not an evasive answer, but it is, I believe, the true answer. We said really the only way to do this is to bring all the people who have skin in the game and to work through, is it a hybrid of what you have today? Is it, more direct control from the city council, but you also add CLA, CAO, the controller to the governance structure? Is there a citizen representation on that? Is it giving you more of a regulatory body ability? And that is in play in several different cities, where the very strong council control. There's some cities that have very strong mayor control, right? And then there are some where neither party is completely in control, and those don't work at all. They're sort of more closer to what we have now, which is I'm not accountable, you're not accountable, stuff slides between. So we really believe, really quickly, because there is momentum, people are genuinely interested in seeing change, regardless of their, where they sit in the argument. The mayor's office, as we worked through this, was really supportive. I'm sure they have a view as to how it should go. When we spoke with you, you were really supportive of change. And I think genuinely interested in what could that change look like. And so I think working through the issue in as short but appropriate time as possible and coming up with this is what will work. I think changing the role of OPA is essential to that so that it truly can do the job that I think was originally envisioned, but right now it doesn't have the authority to do. It's sort of stuck in the middle. And this is my view. This is not Dr. Pickle's view. I'm speaking for what Navigant believes. But we think that office could do so much more if it's changed a bit, right? And staffed appropriately. So, there isn't a good, quick answer, because what you don't want to do is make it worse, right? And so just imposing some of the options could just muck it up, right? And no point in doing that. 2017 isn't that far away. If, this body could be one of the sponsors for moving that forward and getting that in place by 2017, I think that would be terrific and in the interest of everyone.
So I actually have some ideas that I'm going to be introducing Friday along those lines that I think are, by and large, very well informed. I think they're well informed by your report, what PA's done, what RAND's done, and what I think keep to reoccur as themes that I think that we'll sort of speak to in the future. But I should have started with this. I mean, I think that you did a very good job of recognizing a lot of the strengths of the utility. I mean, one of the things that sort of really shown to me, at least, was that this utility is very good situationally. It knows it precisely, and I think that's precisely what to do when it needs to do it. And if we figured out a way to sort of get out of its way, I think that you would find that the utility would perform a lot more efficiently in some respects than it otherwise would with the policy and political intersections that take place so often at the utility. And I think, you know, the IRP most recently sort of spoke to this, its biggest strength, which is the people of the utility. I mean, there is this expertise there that, to me, worries me a great deal that we're going to lose the sort of the talent and the knowledge, given the fact that most of these folks are eligible to retire in the near term. So it begs a question about personnel, and you mentioned it in your report, civil service, and all these other things that I think we should contemplate in the future under the auspices of reform. So I should have begun there. This is a very capable department, but it's also very good at making plans. And I think you highlight that in particular on the water side of things. We have, as a matter of example, strategic water plans, the 2008 Water Supply Action Plan, the 2009 Sustainability Plan, the One Water LA Plan, the 2014 Mayor's Plan, but there isn't a budget plan to figure out how to reconcile all of those very laudable goals. And so I think it just continues to underscore the need for more management of the utility from full-time directors. And how you get there, I think, is going to be very interesting as a policy debate, but very well done. I mean, I learned what I thought was an awful lot already about the utility. I learned, I think, twice as much than I expected to in this report, and have dog-eared and highlighted my little heart out. And I hope it will make for a good sort of motion this Friday. You know, with all due respect, I don't know that we have, and I certainly don't, have time to convene another group of people. And I think that you've narrowed the focus very well for us. But I think there is enough out there, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, with the RAND report, the PA Consulting, the Los Angeles 2020 Commission, and now your 2015 IEA report, to put forward a measure for consideration to be placed on a ballot this year. Cool. And I will be moving that forward this week to start the conversation, because quite frankly, I can't wait anymore. And I think it really would be irresponsible on us as a council to move forward on a rate increase without fixing the underlying problems of the utility. And that is to say that we need to figure out how to govern and be more accountable to the rate base and the rate payer. So stay tuned for that. I think it should be, at a minimum, exciting for some of those who get excited about things like that. I don't have very much more to add, colleagues, because I think I'm sure that all of you, as I did during the break, enjoyed a great deal the work that Navigant prepared for us. But I'm happy to go to my vice chair here if he's got any questions.
Great. In fact, I have a bunch of questions. Starting just kind of a look back, the IEA survey from 5 years ago. How much of that did we implement?
I would answer that question this way. When we completed the last survey in 2009, we were asked as part of that survey to review what was done in 2002. And that was a mixed record, based in large part on the department not keeping a record of the recommendations made in governance over the recommendations that were made in 2002, and then following them through over the next 5, 6, 7 years. A great deal of work was done in the planning aspect on the power and water side. I think that the results from this survey find that. I don't know that every area of focus in 2009 was addressed by now.
And I'll add some specifics. So I think IT and technology were identified as big issues in the last one. They're bigger issues now, right? The issues are more complicated and they're bigger, and the CIS system has certainly made them more larger than life as well. I think one of the things that happened since under the previous general manager, the water system and the power system became more autonomous, and in becoming more autonomous, some of the financial controls that were in place before that we thought were appropriate were unraveled. So they actually sort of took a step backwards in terms of financial accountability and reporting. We talked about management stability at that point in time at the very top. I still think the average is, 2 years-ish. So that's sort of about the same as it was. Customer service wasn't a focus in that report as it was in this one, so we can't really comment on customer service specifically. We did find fault back then with integrated system planning on the power side, that it needed to be improved. That's improved dramatically. On the water system, we talked about their need to implement better project management systems. They did. So I would say there's some big successes and there are some noticeable gaps soon. I do believe the department keeps a record or a log of where they are against those things, so I think it's something that could easily be made available to you.
Right, no, I'd like to see that and make sure that as we move forward, we're tracking that in terms of the many important issues that you've raised here, that we're tracking how we do as we move forward, so that in 5 years when I ask the same question,
you get a better answer.
The IT stuff that you mentioned and cybersecurity concerns me greatly, not just because I chair the committee that oversees IT stuff and get involved in that, but because of the way you highlighted it, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for raising that. And you described like the enterprise security plan and how we need to, it could be a question of motivation to work on it, but there may be other obstacles, and if you could speak a little bit to what are the actual obstacles to focusing in on that besides motivation, or is it really all about motivation?
I think there's a cultural issue in that the people who are responsible for, so power system is responsible for the power system, the water system is responsible for the water system, other stuff such as customer service, joint services has part of that. So I think part of it isn't even motivation, it's I only care about what I care about, to be colloquial. And cybersecurity is an enterprise activity, right? It is not a isolated division or a silo. It is one thing, because if you can get in the door through one part of the system, you'll be able to get into the rest of the system in many cases. So I think part of it is actual structural management, right? That it is not only not optimal, it is suboptimal. So I think motivation, and I would describe motivation differently. I don't think they're unmotivated. I think culturally it hasn't been as important. If it's something we have to comply with, the department is amazingly good at complying. So if we have to comply, they will comply. And if you look at their records, you'll see that. Going beyond compliance, thinking forward in terms of what do we need to do proactively and how do we need to manage this as one enterprise, I think that's a cultural issue. And I think culturally they're just not there. So I'd say the management organizational structure and the culture don't lend themselves. And then also expertise. They don't have all the expertise they need.
And related to that, on page 60, you say that the IT strategic agenda is good, but it has a limited scope compared to other utilities. And I wanted to understand, it seemed a little bit like a contradiction.
Right. No. Our major finding, just to go back to your previous question, in 2009 was that IT was the biggest strategic challenge facing the department. The observation around the strategic agenda is an important one because it is not a fully fledged strategic plan where there's an understanding of all of the services that the department has to provide, the systems required to provide those services, the business processes that need to change to implement those systems and deliver those services, and then the business plan and the business case for system prioritization. That's what we're talking about, not being in place at the department. The strategic roadmap is a much higher level document that talks about, again, at a higher level, CIS activities, perhaps IVR activities, activities related to the ERP implementation, which is pending, but does not get into enough detail in our perspective as compared to other utilities.
Mr. Chair, I have a number of specific questions, but what I'd love to do is take a couple of minutes and hear from the ratepayer advocate and hear from DWP in terms of their thoughts about Navigant, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair, to get 2 minutes from each of them.
Absolutely, Mr. Vice Chair.
So if we could have both ratepayer advocate and a representative from DWP just come up to give their reaction, but you guys stay there.
I wouldn't miss this part.
Yeah.
Jeff, be nice.
And,
I'll be nice.
Jeff, you want to go for either way?
I'll let Dr. Pickle go first.
We welcomed and, in fact, built some of our rate review on components of what has been accomplished in the IEA study, in particular building on their infrastructure work and on their rate comparisons components. And we've studied it with interest. Yes, we think reflected in our billing system study that certain governance changes were important, but we were suggesting little steps before big steps in that process.
So it's not that from your perspective, it's not that the big steps being proposed are necessarily wrong. You just thought we should build.
We should attempt little steps before we take big steps.
Jeff Peltola, CFO for DWP. I think, again, the work that was done in the IEA survey was very productive, was very useful for us. We're attempting to look at, back to your question about the 2009, we want to make sure we're not in that spot. And it has been very useful as part of the rate requirements. And Andrew talked a number of different things on the reporting that we put in place that will be coming to this body as part of the rate action that I think are going to be very productive, very transparent, and will help us as we move forward. We do have a lot of challenges, and they identified those. We're going to work forward to try to accomplish much of what they said.
Was there anything in the report that either of you take exception with, that as we go through that we shouldn't assume is accurate? Not to put you on the spot or ask you to throw them under the bus, but it's important as we read back through this to know if we're all on the same page of both the recommendations and the observations. If there's something out there that you want to flag it now.
It was,
you can flag it later too.
yeah, it was 600 pages, so there's always little things. But I mean, by and large, the big issues, I think Navigant did a great job of working with us, as well as the joint administrators of working with us, so that we went through, we looked at the drafts, we provided a lot of that feedback. So I'm pretty comfortable with what we saw in there. Again, I think it's identified a lot of challenges for us going forward.
Again, it was 600 pages, and we weren't involved in the drafting. So, like you, we're picking it up and absorbing it all. And that said, we have incorporated some components into the rate review.
Thank you. I don't want to hog time, but I have a few more questions, or you can come back to me, or I'll ask one or two. And then, page 22, you talked about the procurement process as being always the lowest bidder, and that's not the way to do it. Is there a better solution, or what is your solution that you're?
Is it on the executive summary or on the main report?
I think it was on the main report.
Okay.
I think in general the department's procurement process is mired between trying to comply with a very complicated contracting out process that's partly necessitated by the MOU and incredibly strict requirements from their own board. The dollar value that the procurement group has to get board approval for, I think it's contracts over $100,000, is almost absurd. And that's because there were so many trust issues between the board and procurement historically. So even when they want to do things, they can't do them quickly. We have found, though, all credit to the department for being really creative. They've found some, we think, really innovative ways to shortcut that. You know, they're increasingly in the energy efficiency program. One of the ways they're going to meet their really stretch energy efficiency goals is to utilize the contracting vehicle of SCAPA. They're a member of SCAPA. SCAPA's contracting process is, you know, by comparison, you know, light speed. The department figured out how to do that. They'd been using SCAPA as the vehicle for many of their renewable projects and other power projects for years. And they've now sort of said, you know, we can leverage that. And, you know, the difference in throughput is dramatic. And so that's an example of what can they change? They can change by outsourcing procurement, in effect, right? Using the procurement vehicles of others relying more and more on a different process. To fix their process, that's a Herculean task and will get jumbled up in all sorts of things. So if they can contract out the contracting out more and more, that's a great way to do it. In the meantime, they can begin the how do we turn this into a modern procurement department effort. So I think there is a short-term fix, which they've already found. We recommend in the rates report, and I believe in here as well, that they increasingly utilize vehicles such as SCAPA to increase their procurement effectiveness.
One of the things I was also intrigued, what you're talking about, was the one, how do we go to that one water policy that we're all moving toward, and how do you integrate DWP with sanitation and with street services and with the other side of the water where you can't ignore it. You look at some places, we have a task force on LA and Israel. In Israel, they're doing 85%, 95% at times water recycling,
right,
and getting all that potable water. And so there's no question that they're completely integrated. So how do you, besides, the governance structure is one piece, but how do you integrate those two, the waste stream water side into the potable side?
Right. So, and increasingly, you mentioned Israel. Australia is another place that's really a leader in this particular effort. And the way they went about it was to simply say, we're going to start with it's all water. So start with water and start with all the uses for water, and then let's look.
But like from a management, I want to hear what you're saying there, but it's also, how do you do it with our management structure? Right. How do you change that?
So I think if you look at the asset in its entirety and you look at the uses in its entirety, and then you say, how are we organized today? And how does that fit the asset and the uses? And how can I actually make the right policy decision that satisfies all the users in one way or another? And then I think you say, what parts of the do I need each of those divisions? Do I need sanitation to do what it's doing? Or can I do that in a different way? The same with how DWP manages potable water. So I think you have to look at it from a use perspective and a policy perspective and then say, I can change this. How do I change it in the most effective way? You have lots of stakeholders, obviously, they'll all have an opinion on that particular one. But I think you have to look at it, sources, uses, how do I manage that? Take that approach. And I think you'll get to the right outcome.
Yeah, figuring out the incentives versus the benefits, and when you incent one agency but the benefit lies with another, how do you mix them? I think that's going to be part of our challenge. And
right.
If we're looking at it,
and that's why you may have to just break down some of the existing governance structures for water and just say, it doesn't make sense because your incentive is actually counter to my overall incentive. So I can't have you drive. I can't have the tail drive the dog, right?
Mr. Blumenfield, let's go to a couple of members, but along those lines, in Australia, it was a network governance system that they used where they did look at uses and sources. And what's fascinating about what the motivation there is ultimately the ratepayer. So you've got to, I think, start from the perspective where you're looking at the best and highest use of water, associate cost, and then, frankly, you got to pick somebody to do it. And that's sort of the hard thing to do around here is to say it's going to be this czar and create a loading order like we do with renewable energy for water and say, here's how we're going to prioritize it and network the governance that we have after we've reformed the governance at the utility. Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your comprehensive work on this report. I'm really grateful that you did the last one because it provides a greater context all these years later. However, uncomfortable we are with that overall context. And I also want to commend the chair for reading 600 pages over the holidays. I hope you had a fine glass of wine to go along with your incredible reading.
Several.
Okay, very good. But this is great to have this report and have this discussion. Mr. Blumenfield asked a number of the questions I was going to ask, but to throw in a few other questions, I think one great point that my staff pointed out to me is it's in terms of the renewable portfolio standard that the state has established, 50% RPS for 2030, but we're recommending 40% instead in the report. Can you address that?
Hey, I'll go backwards. Laura, can I borrow you for a second?
Just out of curiosity, and I understand it's voluntary, but I was,
Can you talk to her?
thank you.
Sure. Well, we're not recommending a percentage of the RPS in our report. We discuss the 40% RPS that is recommended in the 2014 Integrated Resource Plan.
I see.
And that, at the time, was a stretch RPS compared to the state. That was before Senate Bill 350 defined the 50% in 2030. So we expect that the next IRP will incorporate the 50% by 2030.
So it's an aspirational percentage that we hope to get to.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think that's any huge deal. I was just curious to see why the discrepancy there. Thank you so much. And then in your PowerPoint presentation under governance, can you dial down on the following statement? Many of the short-term reporting and transparency issues are being addressed by Ladwp in the proposed rate ordinances. Can you highlight the many that you're talking about and the ones that could be addressed to a greater degree?
Do you remember how many there are altogether, metrics? Yeah. So let's say in the new ordinances between power and water, you're going to see somewhere around, approximately, don't quote me, 40 performance metrics that are tied to the programs you care the most about. So what's the success rate in achieving the RPS goals? Where are you, and then what's the dollar value, the cost of doing that, right? So that will be tracked, and there's a deadband associated with it. So if you're plus or minus 10%, then, and the report goes to the DWP board, the ratepayer advocate, and when it's out of tolerance, to this committee. So when it's out of tolerance, you'll say, and then the ratepayer advocate, when it's out of tolerance, is required to provide you a report. Was it reasonable? Let's say it cost them, $2,000 to replace a pole, and the normal industry average is $500, and you go, wow, they've spent all this money, but it turns out there's a pole shortage, right? So you'd go, okay, well, in this particular case, the $1,000 or the $2,000 was fine. We have a reasonable explanation. Or the report might say, hey, time out. There's something seriously wrong with this program. Let's look at it. So for every key spending program, there is a metric like that. And then we also track things like hiring and training effectiveness. So I think, and it will evolve. The way the ordinance is written, collectively, council and the board can modify the ordinances or modify the targets over time. This is a big step in that direction, so they'll evolve. But I think for the things that you're, as a body, really focused on, I would say they're largely captured. And I can send your staff a copy of them because they're in the ordinances in draft form until you approve them. So we're happy to send them to you.
Thank you. And lastly, under the what's next page on your PowerPoint presentation, you talked about the City Council may choose to introduce new motions, and you mentioned a productivity issue within that phrasing. Could you elaborate on that?
Right. So productivity is, there are many measures. The one that we used is employees per 1,000 customers, right? So, for each 1,000 customers, how many employees does it take? And so the benchmarking results of this are in the power rate report. The department is high, sort of fourth quartile in that particular area. And then in the report done by Oliver Wyman for the ratepayer advocate, they look at their total compensation. And on a total comp basis, you can deconstruct it, and they're good in some places and not as good in others. On a total comp basis, they're also in the fourth quartile. So fourth quartile from a total comp, fourth quartile from a productivity, and so it gets to the, yes, these are great programs, but you got to get better at how you do them. And so we've laid out several different mechanisms in the rate report, not in the IEA, that say, here's how you can address these now. Here's how you can address them in a couple of years. We obviously have lots of thoughts on it, but we think it gives you a tool if you need the tool to say, we're concerned about this. We'd like to see progress on this sooner rather than later. Or you can say, we're comfortable with all these metrics and we'll wait to the midpoint review, which I think is in 2.5 or 3 years. So that's a choice that you can make. But you'll have the ability to make the choice, which I think in the past would have been very, very difficult. And, we believe productivity should be tracked from this point forward and reported to this body because it's a lot of money. We support the rate increase because we think the programs are necessary. But we also think doing them in the right way is really important too. So striking the right balance is important.
And do you feel that in the past, in recent years, that reporting has been inadequate?
The short answer is yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for helping to deconstruct this beast. We all have a little bit better understanding than we did before.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just say ditto to Mr. O'Farrell's commendations of everyone's work. And I asked a couple questions. One, I found what you said on security to be interesting, because I did a motion on threats to the grid, and DWP's response basically was, hey, we got it all handled. So I'm assuming that now, based on your report, meant as far as regulatory, as far as NERC and other entities, we're in line, but not as far as the actual need. So it doesn't seem like it's a question of lack of resources or even maybe a little bit more lack of priority, but more a lack of awareness that there was a gap, that just hitting the regulatory requirements is not nearly enough because it still leaves you very insecure.
I agree. I think the department is very compliance focused. So they'll meet the regulatory requirement, and they are meeting the NERC standards, and they've passed all their NERC audits. But going beyond that, exactly what you identified, we think is an area that they need to focus on.
And when I asked for that information, that wasn't really what I was looking for in terms of regulatory. I was looking for actual security, and I at the time thought it was unlikely that we were really as secure as the department was saying. It sounds like you were saying essentially the same thing.
Yeah, and I think to go to Councilman O'Farrell's question of, do I think the reporting has been all it should be? I think in the area of security, physical and cyber, I think the response that you got is not atypical. It is, we've got it covered. It's not a place where questions are welcome, but I think questions are necessary. So I totally appreciate the frustration you had, and I think you're absolutely right.
And does DWP have a formal plan of risk assessment and all of that, security and in the works?
We know of the enterprise cybersecurity plan that is under development. We also know of an emergency management plan, a strategic plan that is underdeveloped. But again, these are under development. And so where they are in that process is in very early stages. And that's why we use the word urgency to be placed on these activities as well as physical security matters.
And do you have a sense of whether they're looking at all the gaps that you've identified?
Our understanding is that they are moving forward on all of the gaps that we identified. I think back to Councilmember Blumenfield's point, attention needs to be given to the follow-through on these recommendations to make sure that they're implemented.
Okay, and the report mentions that we still have problems with the Intermountain Power Project participants. Where are we on that? What do we need to do to overcome those problems?
So I think the department is trying. I think that is literally the proverbial herding cats. You have many partners in that. Each partner has their own self-interest. When and if they want to get off coal, how they want to get off coal, do they want to continue to be part of successor, primarily gas-fired projects? And, we had a really good conversation with Mike Webster about what could you do to go faster, what could you do to accelerate. He sort of talked to us about it. Contractually, their hands are somewhat tied in terms of the approval process and all of that. We pushed them really hard on the, if cost was no object, could you move out of this quicker? Could you, buy out some of the parties? And we spent a lot of time on it because we were interested in, were they truly thinking outside the box? And I would say they are very limited with how much outside the box they can get because of the existing contracts. But they truly are trying to be creative. And I think it's very difficult to align the parties. And some of the parties have already opted out, right? So as they opt out, that's helpful because at least in or out. If you're out, that's great. We can go without it. So I don't know if there is more than they can do than what they're doing, but I think they are intelligently focused on it.
And you kind of identified a problem in terms of staffing. It seems like we're understaffed at both the water and power sides, especially with major challenges ahead, perhaps the greatest of them being a possible flood of retirements. Could we not handle those issues entirely through personnel if we increase the funding substantially?
It's an interesting question because the department certainly wants to hire up to implement these programs, which is somewhat at odds with the productivity statement I just made, right? So if you've got way more employees than your brethren utilities, so part of it is, are you doing things the smart way? And I think some attention needs to be given to, are they doing things the smart way as part of this rate increase? Then once you've satisfied yourselves with that, then there is I think, truly comprehensive human resources plan needs to be developed that doesn't exist. Everyone's aware of this skill cliff, right? Long-serving employees, most of the DWP guys in the back of the room are all smiling because there are people who get to jump off that cliff soon, right? So they're excited about that. Looking at it as a comprehensive system-wide issue, I think is the first step. We didn't see that plan. So I think they're all aware of it. I think power has some plans, water has some plans, joint services might have some plans. There is not a DWP staffing plan that's been worked on in cooperation with the city's personnel department. We think this body and the mayor will have to impel them to do that in a quick thing for you to get accurate information about it. That's something that would be very useful for you to know as you're considering the rate action, right? How much do we really have to hire up? How much productivity can we get? If we are going to hire up, how do we do it? Do we go outside of the current process? We spoke with most of the people who have skin in that game. Would you be willing to let the department go through a different hiring process, not use the city's personnel? We got a lot of very positive responses that, yeah, if there's a better way to do this, obviously that needs to be supported by council, supported by the mayor. But so I think now is the time, A, for the plan, and B, to look at a different way to do it.
Okay. And one last question. My district has probably had most or all of the most spectacular water main breaks over the last 6 years. I'm very focused on the need to improve our replacement cycle and our technology in terms of selecting the ones that need to be replaced before they blow. How are we doing on that change? I know at one point we were on a 300-some year cycle, and I think your report might have said that it would be difficult to improve on that very much. So what's the department planning currently, and what are you recommending?
So there used to be sort of a mythical water industry standard, which is sort of the 90-year replacement cycle that you'll hear in a lot of AWWA studies and in other studies. But it's so non-specific and doesn't sort of look at the dynamics of the system, the geology, all of those sort of things. I think the department's goal is to get to 100 and, I I think it's like 120 or 140, I'd have to look, and they're not there. But the gap is getting more condensed. I think what they are doing is they've revised, you mentioned how they select the pipes. So they've revised the methodology, and we think it's matured, and they're using better math, better systems, better technology to do that. I think so they are more focused on let's truly address the more critical needs. I think they are at the limits of their ability to get more contractors in place to do the work, right? So you can hire people to do it, but a lot of this work is contracted out. Their bandwidth of managing that many contractors in such a short period of time is a big execution risk. So I think it's, you can spend an awful lot of money and not get a whole lot better results, or you can spend a little bit more money and sort of let them kind of go down the path they're going. We think they're going down the right path, and we were not.
Could you explain that? How you could spend a lot more money and not get much better results?
Sure, because so if you hire 10 crews and you focus them very specifically, their productivity can be very, very high. If you hire 100 crews and you don't focus them as well and you don't manage them as well, you can end up, your cost rates can go way up and your replacement rates can actually, not commensurately done. And we have water industry clients who have opened up the money floodgates and been really unhappy with the results. So I would say the way the department managing, not perfect, but pretty good. And they're making progress. It's unfortunate that when their water mains do break, they're, highly visible, highly noticeable traffic stops or basketball courts get flooded. We were not anywhere near as complimentary in the last rate study that we did or in the last IEA study in this particular area. So they're making a lot of progress. I'm sure you can compel them to make more, but I'd say it's not just a money issue because you've got to have enough bandwidth to manage the resources.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Okay, I know we're pressed on time, so I won't ask most of my questions. Just one more topic, though, which we talked a little bit about, customer service. Page 67, you talked about DWP being unable to provide enough data on that, and then something you said about throwing bodies versus taking a step back. I didn't quite understand that, and I want to understand, especially in light of Pulse CIS and everything else, what you're suggesting vis-a-vis customer service, and what really is the root cause of the problem in terms of customer service.
So there are several root causes. One is, I think for years, the department wasn't as customer focused as you would want it to be. The customer was obviously there, but the way the call centers were staffed, manned, trained, the way meter readers, service techs, technology was deployed, none of those things have kept pace with industry trends. The management and the resources allocated to customer service were like, the power system is very well staffed in terms of putting in new generation, building transmission. I would say it is more than adequately staffed. Lots of resources, no expenses spared. Customer service, that wasn't the case. The CIS system implementation then magnified all those issues, exposed the call center issues, exposed the billing system issues, exposed the customer complaints in the field. And what it sort of gets to is you need to take a very different approach where the customer truly is the whole reason you exist. You don't exist for the employees, you don't exist to build projects, you exist to serve the customers. I would say, the very early stages of that are changing, but it's the very early stages. It's not a customer-focused enterprise and hasn't been in the past. So that's a huge part of the issue. Then the systems don't work well, and the way that they're addressing that is to largely throw as many people at it as they can because they can't get the technology in line quickly enough, the call centers using the right technology soon enough. And That's a very expensive short-term solution. Fine, perhaps, as a short-term solution. That's for you all to decide. But as a long-term solution, it's unsustainable. And we asked to see the plan, like the long-term plan. And maybe you've seen the long-term plan, but we haven't. And so, you know, I know there's lots of activity in the city, and I know there's a settlement that's underway. So, you know, I don't want to go too far afield, but having a plan that's fully vetted, fully thought out, that you believe in, I think is absolutely essential. And I don't believe that plan exists, or it certainly didn't while we were writing the report. Or if it did, no one thought we should see it.
So part of it is that no plan in place.
Not that we've seen,
Yeah.
and we asked for it.
And then is this related to the governance issue, and if so, how?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, how did this get in this particular situation would be a focused management issue, right? And, you know, it exists sort of in the vacuum between the pure power system and the pure water system, right? Which is one of the areas where we think, you know, under-focused, under-managed, you know, joint services generally. So governance ties to it, sir.
I mean, is there a governance fix to this in terms of, I mean, there's general governance stuff you're talking about, but specifically on
Yeah, I think there are organizational changes that the general manager can make that I don't believe require ordinance changes or council approval. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think getting more support from other parts of the city is part of the solution as well.
Are some of those laid out in the report?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think we also stress bringing in real technology professionals, not on a contract, not as consultants, not as hired guns. Sure, you can do that as well. Hire those people into DWP. You need their DNA, and you need their DNA to reproduce.
Very good, colleagues. As you can see, there is a lot to talk about here. We do have some speaker cards here, so let's go ahead and thank you very much for your presentation. Again, well done, very informative. Mr. Barajas, Mr. Humphreyville, and Mr. Boy. Mr. Barajas?
Okay. Well, let me just say that one of the indications of your problems is you did not prepare the way of the future. Now, what do I mean specifically? One of the policies in the field of science that we have looked into is the future calls for what's actually the real source of renewable, what's called a source of renewable energy is fusion nuclear power into fusion. Now, why do I say that? What has been the disease of the community the minds of the community? This facility, which is called the Energy Committee Environment, your emphasis should have been on the future of energy. The scientific proof is fission, fusion. Renewable energies gives you an increase of what? Deficient resources.
Mr. Boy.
Yes. Yes, on Tuesday, your DWP commission already approved a 5-year rate hike on electric, all behind the backs of every single ratepayer. What a disgusting way to handle this situation. And now, you're going through that same pedantic bullshit way of saying you're going to tie a rate hike for 5 years with quote-unquote reforms. Ha, ha, ha. That's just exactly what you did before. The LA DWP is a criminal organization ran by criminals that are out of control. They're stealing our money. They are not doing what they're supposed to do. They have $1 billion of back job orders. So if the ratepayers would have looked at that, added that into the equation, the rate would have failed the test, whether or not they could ratepayer hike us or not on a profit. Vote no on that rate hike.
Mr. Humphreyville.
My name is Jack Humphreyville. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. We need new governance because, quite frankly, the ratepayers just don't trust you guys. The major problem with DWP is City Hall. Any solution that does not involve the ratepayers will not be accepted by the ratepayers and the voters. Things that need to be done: transparency. We need financial statements that are equivalent to what a publicly held company would do. We need to establish ex parte communications where people at City Hall who talk to people at the City Count, at DWP, it has to be registered and has to be disclosed to the public on a timely basis. I think we need to beef up the RPA, the ratepayers advocate, so they can do a much better job and also be much more vocal. I think we need a new personnel department for the Department of Water and Power. There's 9,000 people, and they don't need to rely on the bureaucracy of City Hall. I also think we need to make sure that we can do outsourcing, especially as it relates to solar power and as it relates to the replacement of the mains. And finally, if you don't think that the DWP isn't a hot-button issue, I'll refer you back to Proposition A, the half-cent sales tax increase, which I wrote the opposition argument for and went to 50 or 60 neighborhood councils and homeowner groups. And all I had to do is say, you know, are you going to give the people who gave you DWP $250 million more? And the answer was no. And that was particularly true in your district, Bob, and in your district, Paul. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, there is no action on this item, at least as it relates to the report, so we'll go ahead and note and file it in as much as it was submitted for informational and maybe even inspirational purposes, as we'll see in my motion on Friday. So let's go ahead and note and file that. Let's go ahead and go to item number 2, please, Mr. Prieto.
Certainly, item number 2. DWP reports relative to, I got to turn the page, relative to the K Road Moapa Solar Project Power Purchase Agreement. We have staff from the Department of Water and Power and the CAO's office.
Very good. I'm sorry for the staff. Why don't we do this? Let's take public comment, and then we'll see if my colleagues have a tremendous amount of questions on this, and then we'll sort of talk to staff as the case goes. So let's go with Mr. Barajas and Mr. Aresti.
Item 2, relative to a proposed amendment to the K Road MAPA Solar Project Power Purchase Agreement. Again, our LaRouche PAC organization has actually we have understood what the case of Germany going solar and wind has caused in their country by getting rid of nuclear power. The very fact that you're promoting solar, when the case study of Germany proves that solar, in particular, gives you at least less than 1/3 of what is the total capacity that was promised to you. In other words, the research from 2000 to 2015 shows that you do not get the energy, and the pay rates go higher and higher and higher.
Mr. Aresti.
Another boondoggle scam, and what you do is that you buy this and you sell it back to us for hundreds of % higher than it should cost. If you would have stuck with traditional methods of power generation, we would be having major rate reductions right now as the price of oil is falling on the world market down to $23 a barrel, the lowest since 2003. But you guys are making us pay an exorbitant amount of money for electricity while the rest of the country is going to share in this unanticipated benefit of being able to lower the cost of electric. We are in a city that does not grow jobs. We are in a city that is in crisis, and the last thing we need to do is raise rates. And on Tuesday, the criminals at the DWP raised our rates, and you're going to go and you're going to rubber stamp it. Vote no on that rate hike. You people are miserable. We don't trust you, and you're disgusting.
If we can have staff come on up. Mr. O'Farrell, I know that you've got a couple of questions.
I'm John Dennis, the Director of Power System Planning and Development. I have also with me from my staff
Robert Castro, Generation Development.
And I'm Janelle Irving with the Office of the CAO.
And this particular item before you today is this contract originally was for 250 megawatts of solar energy for a period of 25 years. It was approved in September of 2012. the developer has asked for an amendment in order to meet some of the requirements of the tax equity investors. The proposed amendment is to allow them to reject our purchase offer when the appraised fair market value of the solar facility is greater than the maximum purchase price. There's an option at years 10, 15, 20, and 25 that we have as LADWP. It's just an option for early purchase of this facility. And at that time, we get an appraisal, there's a fair market value, and if that's a dispute between us and the developer, then it just gives them some options to either accept that or to reject that. In turn for that, which again, that's an option, we have a very firm price offer here today that they have made, and that is to reduce the price of this as far as the power purchase agreement. This results in a savings of $66 million to the city over the life of this contract. And as well, in addition to not only a cost reduction to allow this option for them, there is also some additional savings in options for curtailment. That means is that there may be some times operationally where we may need to curtail some of the operations, and there are provisions that we put in there as well. So it gives them a little bit more flexibility at a lower price. This particular facility is about 30 miles north of Las Vegas. It's in the Nevada area, and it will tie into our balancing authority.
Let's hear from the CAO and the RPA if they have an opinion on this, and then we'll go to questions.
Our office has reviewed the proposed amendment to the power purchase agreement and recommends approval of the proposed resolution and ordinance. There's no impact to the city general fund, and approval of the proposed amendment will result in a total cost savings to the department of approximately $111 million, which would benefit the department's power revenue fund. And so to kind of to piggyback on what he was saying, in regards to the purchase option, DWP continues to have no obligation to purchase at those times. And also to note is that the purchase option specifically states that further authorization from the board and the city council would be required to exercise that option. So in return for that change, the $111 million in cost savings is what is in the proposed amendment. Also, the city attorney has reviewed and approved the proposed resolution as to form and legality, and the Office of the CAO recommends approval of this item.
Mr. Radke?
We've reviewed this proposed amendment, and we're comfortable with it. We think the changes in the buyout provisions are appropriate, and we like the cheaper price. And I think the key aspect is it's important to review these amendments as they come forward and do the balancing of costs. It's important these approval of amendments don't go on automatic.
Very good. Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I know the answer to this, but just for clarification purposes, first of all, it sounds like a great deal for ratepayers. How long has this agreement been in place?
This was approved in September of 2012.
Okay, so that's how.
This is 4 years ago, yeah.
So it's been in for 4 years. So that's where we are in the cycle of getting to 10 years or whatever. We're 4 years in, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and so my question is, in terms of it's on tribal lands, the Moapa tribe.
Yes.
Band of Paiutes in north of Las Vegas. Are there any sensitivity issues whatsoever, or is it near any sacred sites, burial grounds, etc.? To your knowledge, I'm thinking it's not, because why would they enter into an agreement like this if it were? But just for our own sense of.
I'm not aware of those. The developers did do all their necessary reviews so that the criteria for construction of these, as well as the clearing and mitigation, met the obligations of both California CEQA environmental processes, so that they would also meet all of our requirements for renewable credits in California.
And so that entity is in agreement with the tribe to be on their lands to then
yes.
Make the agreement with us.
So they have all the necessary approvals with Department of Interior and the other agencies necessary for the construction, development, and distribution of power to our system.
Okay, I just wanted
this is their second.
to be rest assured, that's all. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Bloomington.
Thank you. The purchase option agreement obviously has some value. We're giving up some value. It's not $111 million. $111 million is the value we're getting. and presumably what we're giving or losing is worth a lot less. But just to keep our eyes wide open, what are we losing? Not necessarily that you can quantify it in terms of dollars, but what is the benefit of what we are giving up?
There's some negotiating strength at the time when you come into the, to evaluate this at years 10, 15, 20, and 25. If we are interested in purchasing that project,
right.
Again, that would be a matter of looking if you're, and certainly we would not make that purchase until we had an assessment. There's some sort of a fair market value. There's an appraisal process that happens. And there are caps that are set on those purchases. When we entered into this agreement in September 2012, we said these purchases will not exceed these amounts. So it gives some negotiating
if the
room.
Actual fair market price is way above that cap, that delta is what we're giving up.
That's,
right.
or we would just, the developer would have the option not to sell to us at that time.
They have the option not to sell for us, so presumably if it's worth X amount more, we're giving up the potential to get that extra piece, right? I mean, that's because we could purchase it right now under the agreement at the capped value, and we're saying we're going to give that up, and we'll purchase it or not purchase it, but it'll have to be fair market value.
That's correct.
They can reject anything below fair market value. So in essence, we're giving up the right to buy something at a potentially lower value, and there's a gamble there. So it's what is that value versus the probability of getting to that value that we're weighing against the savings of 111 million? Is that what you said?
That's
versus
correct.
111 million.
It is certain.
And it sounds like it's not even close, that the delta will be in the millions, and there's a probability factor on there anyway. Is that accurate?
I think that's a fair statement. That's correct.
And then the other question is how could the potential merger or being acquired for MOAPA, how does that affect this?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question?
How could MOAPA's potential merger, and that's partially what's driving this?
No, it's not. Actually, K-Road this project was bought out from K-Road by First Solar. So that buyout is already done, that change of control. So that was done a number of years ago. This is actually being done because the market has changed, the tax structures have changed, become a little more financially conservative. So they want to structure the deal such that they can get tax financing. And tax financing is asking for this cap on the buyout purchase.
So the merger or them being acquired doesn't do anything?
Right. That's passed. That's in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. Hearing and seeing no additional questions on the item, we'll go ahead and let's see here, item number 2. We'll go ahead and approve the department's request for authority to execute an amendment to the purchase power agreement purchase option with MOAPA as specified. Thank you very much. All righty, let's go ahead and take public comment on item number 3. I will remind members of the public that we are abiding by rule number 62, which gives speakers a total of 5 minutes for this committee session. So that being said, Mr. Barajas and Mr. Aresti, you are on your 3rd minute.
Solar to grid program. Well, again, the fanaticism for solar should not take priority when you stop to consider what it should actually be referred for. I think the technology itself, as people might know this, that the International Space Station uses it, but in terms of people getting the idea on Earth, you do not move a society into a solar anything, panel anything, because the technology that will supply the electricity to these sources, which you call whatever lighting or whatever, and that would be cheap, that would produce enough of your income, it would be fusion as we phase out oil with fission.
Yes, tonight at 5:30 in Cypress Park, Kevin James and his little merry band of fools will be over there, and that's the Board of Public Works, covers the Bureau of Street Lighting. Water and Power, and they're going to make a contract with the Bureau of Street Lighting, like they're all going to sit on one side of the table to another. It's the same group of puppets. It's just different names. All of it's done behind closed doors. But now they're playing with fire over there at the Board of Public Works because they just created an assessment district to charge the federal government for a lighting district on a Prop 218 ballot. Wait till the federal government finds out that you're going to start charging them property taxes for your bullshit. Keep it up, because they're watching, and they're going to stop you one day soon.
Mr. Aresti, all right, so let's go ahead and have staff come on up. Colleagues, do you have any questions on item number 3 for staff? Hearing and seeing none, would you like to make a short presentation?
This is John Dennis, Director of Power System Planning. This is an opportunity for Bureau of Street Light to install 9,000 solar panels on throughout the city.
Very good.
At the rate of the feed-in tariff program.
CAO's office.
Hi, Robert Roth, CAO's office. Our office reviewed it. We recommend approval of this motion. In addition, wanted to mention that $500,000 has been set aside in the UB. Our office is planning to provide language to accompany the package for your approval at council.
Very good. Ratepayer advocate.
We believe this MOU sets an effective ceiling on pricing for solar for these small projects within the city, and we think that's important as a ceiling.
Very good. Colleagues, let's go ahead and approve the department's request for authority to Mr. Blumenfield.
Just, can I ask 2 quick
Sure,
questions?
absolutely.
The cost is all on Bureau of Street Lighting. Why is that?
Well, the cost is not, for this program here, the department is purchasing energy from the Bureau of Street Lighting. So the cost that we discuss in the CAO report is from DWP purchasing that energy similar to any other outside developer. There will also be a cost for street lighting, however, to develop and implement their own program.
And what is their cost going to be on?
Well, their cost, I'd prefer to have street lighting speak to their own cost.
That's not the energy cost you're saying. That's just
right.
That's
No,
separate and apart.
they have their own development. I mean, they'll have to purchase panels, inverters, install. Okay. They sell the energy though to DWPs.
So we'll just treat them exactly as if it was another outside entity and pay them at that rate. But they will have development costs for install and putting the panels and the likes of that into and tying into the system.
And who determines where the panels go? Which of the 9,000?
That'll be up to the street light to do that. There's 215,000 lights in the city, and they'll be sprinkling these 9,000 throughout the city at different locations. That'll be up to them to select those, and it'll also be on some of those that will be good opportunities to tie in and easy to tie in for the installation, lower cost.
Great, thanks.
Very good. So let's go ahead and approve the department's request for authority to execute a power purchase agreement with the city's Bureau of Street Lighting for the purchase of solar energy and renewable energy credits through the Bureau of Streets Lighting Solar to Grid program as specified. Hearing and seeing no objection, that shall be the order. Item number 4, let's go ahead and take speaker cards on that. Mr. Barajas and Mr. Aresti, this is your 4th minute.
Now, I just want to reference this, but I'm not too familiar with it, actually. But if it's just like what this thing says here, it's just a battery to power your grid. But if I'm wrong, and I'll just take a so-called stab at this. But obviously, what are we talking about? We need energy. But yet, if this is a direction that you think it's a good idea, that you somehow utilize a battery when nuclear facilities can give you all the energy that you need, I guess it's a backwards approach to giving the population the energy they must utilize for their own seeking benefits, industrial and so forth. So I hope this is not some battery. That's pretty backwards if you ask me. Nuclear fusion, fission.
Yes, we're going to have a smart grid demonstration by our good friends, our trusted Department of Water and Power, because you know how trustworthy they are with things like this. So here we go again with these words, and they're just words. This is all done in a back door. This is all done behind closed doors and secret parking garages and in smoke-filled rooms. We're living in the Gilded Ages. This is all just crap. There is no smart grid. There is nothing that's going on except you turn on a light switch, either it works or it doesn't work. We're paying so much more and getting so much less. The DWP needs to be shut down. It needs to be sold to private investors. You got to close the book on this failed piece of garbage.
Very good. Let's go to item number 5. We have one speaker card on that. Mr. Aresti, you're on your 5th minute.
Yes, illegally arrested by Charlie Beck, November 10th, 2015. So IBM stock today took a big fucking crash today, and so they need your help. They need your money, so you got to bail them out because they're too big to fail. So the LADWP will do that. They need to continue with IBM software licenses, subscriptions, supports, and implementation of something called the Maximo Asset Management System. And what is this exactly? Well, it doesn't matter. What matters is IBM is going bankrupt, and they need your help, and they need your money. So please, whatever you're paying them, triple it temporarily. Give them a loan. They need about $45 million because tomorrow when they trade, they need to pump their stock price up. Please save IBM.
Very good. Colleagues, this was going to be a consent item. Unless there's a disapproval, I'd like to move this approval of the department's request and give them authority to execute amendment number 7 to the existing agreement with IBM to allow the Department of Water and Power to continue software licenses, subscriptions, and related matters as specified. Hearing and seeing no objection, that shall be the order. Item number 6. Mr. Barajas, please come on up for public comment. It's your 5th minute.
All right, so we have a Open Access Technology International for energy scheduling, energy trading, and transmission management tools. Obviously, this is an agreement which was pretty much indicated is, I'll just bring up the subject, how are you going to save the trade of these sources, like schedule these facilities to conduct itself in such a way that they can provide the energy that would actually be contractual agreements. In other words, you have to think what just happened here earlier. You're struggling to meet the demands of energy, but yet you're going forward with this policy of you will meet the demands, but I have not heard yet how you will provide the energy, unless you're going to raise the pay rates, and maybe a few people can't pay, so maybe you give them the energy there.
Colleagues, let's go ahead and with item number 6, unless there's any questions or comments, this item was also suggested for consent. Approve the Department of Water and Power's request for authority to execute amendment number 5 to the existing agreement with OATI to continue to allow department to access its services as specified. Very good. Hearing and seeing no objection, that shall be the order. Items 7, 8, and 9, let's go ahead and take in consent because there aren't any eligible speakers on that. Hearing and seeing no disapproval of that, those items are deemed approved. That takes us, colleagues, to public comment. Mr. Barajas.
All right, I wanted to bring...
Mr. Barajas, I'm sorry, let me interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Item number 4, I wanted to go ahead and reiterate our approval It is to approve the department's request for authority to execute Amendment Number 1 to the Smart Grid Demonstration Cooperative Project Agreement as specified. Very good, thank you. Mr. Barajas, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to bring two subject matters before the committee. This has to do with energy and also the environment. What I have here is basically the New Silk Road becomes the World Land Bridge Report, and as you can see, this map in the back is world development. This includes, even as you can see, the LA area connecting the world. It's a transportation corridor. Obviously, you're going to need a lot of concrete and a lot of energy and a lot of this and that skilled workers in order to produce this world outlook. Now, the other side is this. The garbage that you see in front of you is Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Now, the document that I quote here is Global Warming Scare is Population Reduction, not Science. This report went through every single thing that you need to know that has to do everything of the scientific fraud that the Queen has pushed on the population and the Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Barajas. That concludes your time. Colleagues, there is no additional business before us. We are adjourned. Thank you.